Hey folks, it's Ray at DJI here, and everything you just saw in that intro sequence was shot on the Mini 2. Now, while it may have looked like ActiveTrack, it actually wasn't, and that's because the Mini 2 does not have ActiveTrack in it. At least not from a DJI official marketing standpoint. Now see, there are no obstacle avoidance sensors on the front or the back of the Mini 2. It does have ground sensors on the bottom. These detect how high it is above the ground when it's close to the ground for landings and stuff like that, but they won't keep it from running into a tree or a house or you or car or anything like that. That's pretty disappointing, especially for me as someone who does a lot of sports tracking type stuff. Still, despite that, ActiveTrack is actually under the covers here. As you'll see, it's the exact same ActiveTrack fundamentals that you'll find in their higher end drones like the Mavic series or even the Phantom series. And with enough creativity, you can get some of those same shots, at least for a limited time period. And the key to understanding that is understanding the 5 QuickShot moves. So the Mini 2 has 5 QuickShot moves. They've got the Dronie, Rocket, Circle, Helix, and the new Boomerang that was introduced on this that the Mini 1 doesn't have. QuickShot moves tend to last 15 to 25 seconds or so, and they have a defined starting point and a defined ending point, and you're basically just along for the ride. Unlike some of DJI's higher end drones where you can modify the velocity, rotation speed, and stuff like that, you can't quite do that here. However, if you get creative enough, you realize that while you cannot control them directly, you can actually control them indirectly. Now, I will note, this is definitely not hard to do this. It just takes a little bit of trial and error. For example, that intro shot sequence that you saw there ended up with like 6 or 7 usable shots. I probably took 60 or 70 shots to get that right. Still, as you get better and better at it, you'll get the number of like bad shots to good shots down to probably like 3 to 1. And you may be asking yourself, why not just simply get a Skydio 2 or the Mavic Air 2 or a higher end DJI drone? And absolutely, if you plan to do a lot of sports tracking, this is the wrong drone for you. But if you just need a couple quick shots here and there, no pun intended, or if you have other things like weight limits or whatnot to work within, then this is definitely an option that you can make work in a pinch. Okay, so with that, let's just jump straight into the footage. I'm gonna walk through how this works. Now keep in mind, you're looking at the screen recording here. I'll show you the final result, full res version in just a second. The first thing you do is to choose a quick shot menu and then choose the type of quick shot. We're gonna start off with the Dronie because that's probably one of the easiest ones to understand here. And what you wanna do is get your drone in position and get to the point that the little dot shows up. Once you have a dot, that means it's found you as an object and you can get going. Once you select that green dot, it becomes a square on the object it's tracking, and then you'll go ahead and press that start button. At that point, it's ready to go and it's gonna start a countdown to 3 seconds. However, don't go anywhere yet. Wait an extra 3 or so seconds before you start going. And the reason for that is those first couple seconds, it's a bit slow on the tracking and you'll quickly get out of range. And you can see here, so far so good, and then boom, I'm out of range. And the reason for that was just a little bit too fast in that one. And that's part of the challenge here is that because you can't control how fast this goes, and because it's not gonna track you forever, you've gotta go ahead and basically work within the bounds of this particular established shot. You see here on the next attempt, I bring it up even higher, but in this case, I just simply started too fast and the drone just wasn't going fast enough to get ahead of me there. And then I basically just ride right out of frame of it. So it's just kind of pointless. However, one thing that eagle-eyed spotters may have noticed in the bottom right-hand corner was the 1080p 30. And that's because even though you may have been in 4K mode for all your other settings, QuickShots has a different resolution panel for it, control panel. So you got to go in there and make sure you change it over to 4K there. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a bunch of 1080p shots, which may be fine, but you know, you paid for a 4K drone, so you might as well use it. By the way, if you're finding this video useful or interesting, just go ahead and whack that like button at the bottom there. It really helps out this video and the channel quite a bit. Now you see for this shot, I'm completely off my right-hand side, so not in front of it anymore. And what's going to happen as the drone pulls back, it's going to go ahead and reveal the windmill up ahead. At this point, this is pretty much a perfect shot in terms of revealing that window. A little bit of like skewing towards the end there because it loses the center point of me tracking, but otherwise it's not too shabby. Now remember that in the Dronie QuickShot, the drone rises, so it'll expand to show more and more of the horizon. Thus, if you're revealing something larger on the horizon like this windmill, you probably want to do it later in the shot. In this case, I was trying to avoid the truck in the background at the beginning there, so the framing wasn't quite right, yet it still tracked for an impressively long period of time here. And now a few minutes later, that truck is gone, and I've gotten this started, and you'll see just how good this shot is overall. And we'll switch to the full res version right now. Now in all of these shots to this point, I've been trying to do a rotational pan across it. But in reality, the easiest way to do this entire thing is to simply just go away from the drone, go away from the camera and let it simply track you off into the sunset. And you can see that right here where I've positioned it slightly behind me, and it's just gonna go ahead and reveal the entire horizon as I ride away from it. Also note, by the way, how strong the winds are on the trees there. Obviously the windmill's going, but the winds are pretty darn strong here, and you don't see any sort of impact at all to the stability of the picture. If you haven't seen my Mini 2 crazy wind test video, where I'm pushing up to about 60 kilometers an hour of wind, definitely check that out in the corner there, because that shows you what this drone is capable of in some of the craziest weather out there. Now, one tip on going off into the horizon: if you rise the drone up a little bit more than you expect, it actually does a much better job of making that entire scene look way more dramatic. Also, remember earlier when I talked about watching out for obstacles and whatnot? Well, that's true in the first couple seconds of the frame, but you can actually get away with it more later on in that sequence. You see here where I go behind the tree, it tracks me just fine. And you can see here later on where I go behind not just a little bit of tree, but also the entire like shrubbery bush thing. And look how small that tracking dog gets. And obviously it loses me at some point in the trees there, just barely, but it's still keeping me centered in the whole shot. And so it actually works out just fine. Okay, so now let's go ahead and step it up a notch. We're gonna go to the circle. Now, historically, you'd use something like this windmill right here. You draw a square around it, and then you just simply let the drone do a big old circle around it. Pretty straightforward. Obviously, the windmill isn't moving. Well, I mean, the windmill thing's moving, but not the, you get the point. That's all straightforward. Where it's way more complex is when you're moving, and that's because in this particular case, the Mini 2 does not really want to leave its focused center point, meaning it knows where the center point of that circle should be, and doesn't really like the idea that you're gonna be moving along with it. And you see right here, it starts off not too bad actually. So it's obviously moving or changing the center point of that circle as I'm going around this turn right here. And so far it's like, yeah, I'll do this for a little while. And at this point it's like, okay, nope, no, it's time to get this circle done with. I've got to create a circle and I'm gonna do it right now. And now this is the point when you think to yourself, obstacle avoidance would probably be good. And right there is when I go ahead and simply stop the drone. And there's a couple things to break down here. One, it no longer tracked me, and that's because it went beyond the allowable range for that particular circle. Unlike something like the Mavic Air 2 that can complete that orbit forever even as you move down the road, in this case, it has its defined circle starting point, so couldn't go beyond that too far. The second thing is that it was about to hit the trees there, and it came within probably like half a second for hitting the trees that are just behind the camera there that it would have hit. The nice thing though with the Mini 2, as long as you whack either of these two sticks to touch them even just the slightest bit, the Mini 2 will instantly stop where it is. It's as simple as that. So as I saw it was getting close to the trees, I just simply touched the sticks and it was done. And in case you're wondering, I had the remote controller basically industrial rubber banded to my bike. It's not the most like elegant of solutions, but it kind of works. I used a couple pieces of rubber strips below it to keep the rattling from occurring. Again, not too complex to find some big rubber bands, but it's not like the best solution overall. Also remember that in the case of the Mini 1 and the Mini 2, you can't just fly with your phone. You have to have this entire controller thing, which makes this whole setup for self-tracking a bit more cumbersome. Now, it's not that the circle is hard per se, it's just hard to time. And the reason is, again, that whole rotational bit there. So you can see right here, we get started, I wait a couple seconds, no problem, and then I get going, but I quickly kind of basically just go right out of frame, and I'm not going that fast here at all. And in fact, in general, when doing a circle, if you go the long way around you, so you can choose which direction you want to go in a circle, you can see the arrows there, left or right. And so when you go the long way around you so that you're not passing underneath it immediately, in that case, it will usually last longer. So you can watch here as this attempt actually kind of works out at the end. You can see right now, it's tracking me nicely, doing an orbit, slowly revealing the landscape around me. Still going good, still actually going good. Yep, we're still going good. And then wait for it, we got some castle action. There we go. And of course it's lost tracking, but it actually sort of works out. And in fact, you can increase the tolerance for failure by increasing the altitude. So you can see here's another circle attempt right there. I've increased it quite a bit higher than before. And it's almost acting like just an eye in the sky camera. It's tracking just fine. You wouldn't know this is doing a circle around me until right about now, when it goes ahead and it starts losing the plot. And it's slowly creeping over to find itself a castle again. This thing just loves to find that castle every single time. But the funny thing is, unless I told you that shot wasn't the way it was supposed to be, you probably would have thought a clever cameraman's like bicycle to castle. boom, right? So sometimes you got to keep perspective on these failures that look like failures from a tracking standpoint are still like great cinematic moments for B-roll or whatever else you want to use it for. Now, it's about this point you're probably getting cocky with yourself and saying, you know what, we can do this. We can do ourselves the Helix. And you go into that menu, you're going to choose a Helix, and you're just going to watch it fail. And the reason you're going to watch it fail is because it's really, really tough. You're combining a circle with going up. And so you lose the ability to have that horizon as your savior, because as you go away from it, it wants to point down, which means that it's going to go back to kind of a starting point there, as opposed to allowing you to go off into the sunset. Which isn't to say you can't make it work. Eventually you can. It's just really, really tough in the Helix to do that. And the Boomerang isn't much better because now you've got both a circle but also an offset circle. And on top of that, it goes up and down. So within this offset Boomerang circle, it wants to increase the altitude and decrease the altitude. So you've got to time yourself to be in the exact right points on both ends of that offset circle so that it doesn't lose tracking. And that is really, really tough. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. And then there's the rocket. This is basically useless for our purposes because this one is designed to go straight up and point straight down. So as you can see, we like immediately outrun it. It doesn't matter how many different ways you try to do this. It is virtually impossible to use in any case where we want movement. It's great for its original intended purpose, which is to just point down and go up, but not for what we want to do is to go away from the camera. Now, of course, while I demonstrated this mostly on a bike, you can do this on anything, on walking or running or a car, even a horse. Anything you can draw a square around within the app, which is basically everything, it'll track it. And of course, the bigger the object, the easier it is to do this because you usually get a larger radius if you're doing the circle, and for the Dronie, it's easier to track the further it gets away from it. Now, ultimately, this entire method is interesting to me because I'm primarily by myself trying to get shots by myself. And the Mini is a nice, really small drone, though if I'm out cycling, I've still got to carry all this junk with me too because you have to have the controller to control the Mini. And while the Mini 2 is limited by the length of the shot, 15 to 25 seconds of continuous shooting, unlike something like the Mavic R2, which can go for many, many minutes, it works for a lot of people. And the reason is that most time for B-roll shots or for social media stuff, you're not using more than 15 to 20 seconds anyways. So if you know the exact spot of the shot that you want, this will probably work just fine for you. Versus if you need to track a much longer time period, then this isn't really ideal. And of course, if patience isn't your thing, you probably don't want to use this either for tracking shots. Anyways, hopefully you found this interesting or useful. If so, simply whack that like button at the bottom there or hit subscribe for plenty more sports technology goodness. Then got a couple more things on the hopper here near term that you won't want to miss. With that, have a good one.